A storm tore Ethan Mercer's ranch apart, and what it revealed was even more devastating than the wrecked cabin. A woman showed up out of nowhere, thin from survival, hands scraped raw, eyes that looked like hope had been beaten out of her. She didn't ask for pity. She asked for work. But every evening she vanished into the woods like she was running from something. Or someone. Ethan thought he was just hiring help. Until one night he followed her and found the truth. 4 children, living in a shack that couldn't protect them from cold, hunger, or danger. And the moment he realizes why she's hiding, that's when everything changes. Because the man she ran from is about to find her. And he's coming to take what's his. Lesson. Real strength isn't never being afraid. It's protecting what matters even when you're terrified. If you're ready to see how one decision turns into a fight for a family's future, stay with me. And if this story hits you, please comment what you would do in Ethan's place. Share it with someone who needs hope and subscribe, because more stories like this are coming. The storm had just about ripped the soul out of his ranch, leaving the old guest cabin a wreck of splintered wood. He was figuring it would be easier to bulldoze it than fix it. That is when a quiet voice behind him said, "Mr. Mercer." He turned to see a woman at the edge of the driveway. She was thin, the kind of thin that comes from hardship, not choice. Her jeans were held up by a belt pulled to its last hole, and her flannel shirt was more patches than original fabric. But it was her eyes that got him. They were the eyes of someone who had stopped expecting anything good from the world. He kept his voice calm, like you would with a spooked horse. "Can I help you? I heard you might need a hand," she said, nodding toward the ruined cabin. "I am good with my hands." Ethan looked at those hands. The knuckles were scabbed raw. These were not the hands of someone just looking for a little extra cash. "Martha at the feed store mentioned it," she said. That sounded like Martha, all right. But looking at this woman who seemed ready to run at any second, he knew this was not one of Martha's usual matchmaking schemes. "What is your name?" he asked. Hannah Cole. She listed her skills without a hint of pride. "Cleaning, painting, fixing pipes. I work hard, and I do not steal." She looked him straight in the eye when she said that last part. Ethan recognized that look. It was the desperate stare of someone with nowhere else to go. $15 an hour, he said. Cash at the end of the day. Fair enough. A wave of relief washed over her face. The cabin needs to be completely gutted. Tools are in the barn, supplies are in the mudroom. She just nodded and walked toward the cabin, moving with a quickness that spoke of a life spent trying not to be noticed. She carefully tested the first porch step before putting her weight on it. Smart woman, he thought, and tried to get back to his own chores. But he could not stop watching her. He found reasons to walk by the cabin. The first time she was on her knees, sweeping shattered glass with intense focus. The second time, she was scrubbing black mold from the kitchen cabinets, her shoulders tight with effort. When he cleared his throat, she jumped like a startled deer. "Need something, Mr. Mercer?" Just checking in. The way she called him sir felt wrong. He was not that much older than her. "Ethan is fine," he said. "Yes, sir," she replied. He left before he said something else to make it awkward. The third time, he gave up pretending and brought her a thick turkey sandwich and a thermos of hot coffee. She was under the sink, wrestling with a rusty pipe. He called out, "Brought you some lunch." She slid out, her face smudged with grime, and her eyes locked on the sandwich like a starving coyote. "That is kind, but I am fine. When was the last time you ate?" he asked gently. She mumbled something about breakfast, but her eyes gave away the lie. "Just eat it," he said. "You pass out on me, and it is a whole mess of paperwork I do not want." She finally took the sandwich, closing her eyes for just a second as she took the first bite. The pure, unspoken gratitude in that moment made Ethan have to look away. When the sun started to set, Hannah came out of the cabin. She had worked 8 solid hours without a break. He was in the barn, pretending to sort tack, but really just watching for her. "Finished for the day?" "Yes, sir. I will be back at 7 tomorrow." Ethan counted out her pay, adding a little extra. "That is too much," she said, her eyes wide. "You earned it." He insisted, "Take it, Hannah." Her fingers trembled as she carefully folded the bills and tucked them away like they were treasure. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer." "Ethan," she corrected him quietly. "Thank you, Ethan." As she turned to leave, he saw it. A quick, fearful glance over her shoulder toward the tree line. She was checking for someone. "You need a ride?" he asked before he could stop himself. "No, thank you. I have a way." She was already walking fast down the long driveway, clutching that old canvas bag. She turned left at the county road, heading away from town and deeper into the dark woods. Ethan told himself it was not his business, but that frightened look she gave stayed with him. Something was very wrong. The next morning, he was on his porch at 5 with a cold cup of coffee, just watching the driveway. Hannah showed up 13 minutes early, ready to work. She jumped when she saw him, her face smoothing into a careful mask. "Morning, Mr. Mercer." He told her again to use his first name. She tested the word Ethan like it was something foreign before getting right to work. He watched her from his porch as she moved with a quiet fury, tearing out rotted cabinets and scrubbing old floors until they shone. At noon, he brought her a sandwich. She ate only half, carefully wrapping the rest. When he asked, she just said, "Waste is a sin," like a lesson learned the hard way. It reminded him of the church talk he'd run from at 17, but her words were not for show. They were real. "You a church-going woman?" he finally asked one day. Her answer, "I was raised to be," told him nothing at all and shut the door on any more questions. For 3 days, it was the same dance. She worked herself to the bone, then headed out at sunset, always glancing over her shoulder. On the 4th day, he could not take it anymore. He had a gut feeling Hannah Cole was in deep trouble and too proud to ask for a lifeline. He decided to follow her. He gave her a 30-second lead, then eased his truck onto the road. She turned off the county road onto a rough gravel track that climbed into the hills. He cut his lights, letting the moonlight guide him. The path grew narrow and wild, but then he saw it, a little flicker of light between the pines. He parked and walked the rest of the way. The place was barely a shack, smaller than his own tool shed. And on its rickety porch, in the fading light, stood 4 little kids. The baby, not much more than a year old, reached out and cooed, "Mama!" The sound hit Ethan right in the chest. The oldest girl, Sarah, announced proudly that they had made supper. Hannah's voice talking to her children was a whole different thing. It was soft and warm, not the clipped, cautious tone he was used to. She hugged them close, and they all tumbled inside the little shack, a whirlwind of life that left Ethan standing alone in the woods with a truth that changed everything. Peeking through a crack in the wall, he saw the inside was just one small, bare room with sleeping bags on the floor. But the kids did not seem to mind. He watched as Hannah took out the other half of her sandwich and split it 4 ways, a sacred offering. It was gone in a flash. The littlest boy, Sam, whimpered that he was still hungry and wanted meat like they had at school. The quiet way Hannah's hands balled into fists told Ethan all he needed to know. She promised them eggs for breakfast tomorrow, and you would have thought she promised them the world. Ethan stumbled back to his truck, his gut churning with a cold anger. 4 kids, living in a place not fit for animals. Their mother worked harder than anyone he had ever seen for $15 an hour, and it was not nearly enough. For the first time in his life, running a successful ranch and making deals, Ethan Mercer felt completely and utterly useless. He couldn't just give her money. Hannah had too much pride for a handout. But reporting her situation would mean the state might take her kids, and seeing the fight in her, he knew that would break her spirit completely. So what was he to do? The answer hit him as he turned the key in his truck. He would give her more work. The next morning, Ethan was on the porch when Hannah arrived. She froze, a flicker of fear in her eyes before she hid it. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "I've got a proposal for you," he said, keeping his voice easy. "The main house needs a deep clean, and the stables are long overdue. I could use someone I can count on. It's extra hours if you want them. Same rate of pay." Hannah's eyes narrowed, calculating. More money was good, but it meant less time with her children. "How many hours?" she asked. "As many as you're willing to work. It could be a full-time job, if that suits you." She thought for a long moment, studying his face for a trick he hoped she couldn't see. "I could work 8 to 5, Monday through Friday," she finally said. "That would be perfect. When can you start on the house?" "The cabin's nearly finished. I can switch over in 2 days." "Sounds like a plan," he said. As she turned to leave, she paused. "Ethan, why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" he asked. "Being so kind." The question landed heavy. He just shrugged. "Maybe I just need the help." He watched her walk away, her shoulders not quite as tense as before. It was a start. He spent his weekend in the big, empty house, feeling like a ghost. 6 bedrooms and more space than any man needs, all going to waste while a woman and her kids were struggling. But first, he had to know more. He drove into town and found Martha Yates at the feed store. "Ethan Mercer," she boomed. "That's twice in 2 weeks. This must be important." "It is, Martha. I need to know about Hannah Cole." Martha's smile vanished. She led him to the back office and shut the door. "Why are you asking about her?" "She's working for me," he said. "Don't give me that," Martha shot back. "I've known you since you were 17 years old. I know that look. You're getting yourself involved." Ethan sighed. "Just tell me what you know, Martha." Her expression softened. "Hannah showed up about 6 months ago, desperate for any work she could find. She's a hard worker, quiet and reliable. She has 4 children, and they're all living in that old, run-down Peterson cabin. That place ought to be torn down." Martha looked him square in the eye. "She's doing her best, Ethan, but raising 4 kids all by yourself is a heavy burden." "Where's the father?" he asked. "That's the million-dollar question. She never talks about it. But I know a woman who's on the run when I see one." The news settled in his gut like a stone. "Does she have any family around here?" "Not a soul. She's all alone." Martha patted his hand. "Whatever you're planning, Ethan, you be careful. Women like her have learned not to trust people easily. Just go slow and don't you dare make a promise you can't keep." He drove home with her words ringing in his ears. On Monday, Hannah arrived right at 8 o'clock, ready to work. "Where should I start?" she asked, sizing up the main house. "The guest wing on the 2nd floor," he said. "It hasn't been touched in years." He tried to focus on his own work, but he found himself listening to the sounds of her cleaning upstairs. At noon, he made 2 sandwiches and took them up to her. She was in a guest room with the windows thrown wide open, scrubbing away years of grime with a fierce determination. "Time for lunch," he said from the doorway. She turned, her face flushed from the work. For a second, she just looked young and pretty, not tired and worn down. She took the plate and ate, and this time she finished the whole sandwich. "How are your kids?" he asked gently. Her entire body went stiff. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Martha mentioned you had children. I did not mean to intrude." She put her sandwich down, her mind clearly racing. "I have 4 children," she said, her voice flat. "They are looked after." "I'm sure they are," he said. "That's not a problem for me. You do good work, Hannah. That is all I care about." She searched his face, looking for a catch. When she found none, her shoulders relaxed just a little. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." After a moment of silence, Hannah spoke up. "Can I ask you something? Why does a man like you live in a big house like this all alone?" Ethan thought about lying, but decided she deserved the truth. "It used to be full of people. My parents, my ex-wife. She wanted a husband who came home for supper, and I was busy building a ranch. We both got what we wanted in the end, I suppose." "Do you ever feel lonely?" she asked. Her question hit a little too close to home. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But being lonely is better than disappointing the people who depend on you." Hannah nodded slowly, a look of understanding on her face. "Yeah," she said softly. "I know that feeling." They finished their lunch without saying another word. But he knew some invisible wall between them had started to come down. That night, he didn't have to wonder where she was going. He knew she was heading back to that little cabin, to face her struggles head-on, and he was determined to help her win that fight. He knew she would wake up and face it all again tomorrow and the day after that. He had to be the one to change things, but he had to move slow and real careful. She was proud, and one wrong step would make her run with those kids where he would never find them. A storm was coming for Hannah Cole, and he planned on being her shelter. The next morning, he started small, asking her to organize his messy office. "Take all the time you need," he told her, and saw a flicker of relief in her tired eyes. Ethan just stood in the doorway, plain stunned. His office was not just clean, it was finally sensible. "Hannah, you did not have to do all this." She looked up from the desk, a little startled. "You asked me to organize it." He shook his head. "I meant just straighten up some. This is amazing." He saw a pleased blush on her face. "I just like things in their proper place." He picked up a labeled folder. "You are a natural at this. Ever kept the books for a business?" Her voice grew quiet. "For a church once. That was a different life." He wanted to ask about the sadness in her eyes, but held his tongue. Instead, he said, "Well, my own bookkeeper is fixing to quit on me. I could surely use the help." She offered to do it along with her cleaning. "I will pay you $20 an hour. It is skilled work." Her eyes went wide. "Oh no, that is too much." He stood firm. "It is what you are worth." She was quiet for a long moment, and he knew she was thinking of her children. "All right," she said softly, "thank you." That night, Ethan put a plan into motion. He filled a box with office supplies like pens and folders. Underneath them, he tucked away other things: batteries, a brand new fleece blanket, protein bars, and vitamins for the children. He left it on the kitchen counter with a note that said, "Office supplies. Take what you need." From the barn, he watched her discover it. She saw the pens, but then her hand stopped on the blanket. She touched the soft material, and her shoulders began to shake with silent tears. Ethan looked away to give her privacy. When he checked again, the blanket and other items were gone, packed safely in her bag. She never spoke a word of thanks, but that was just fine by him. While she was scrubbing the floor, he heard her humming a little tune. It was the first sound he had ever heard her make that was not born from necessity, and it felt like a victory. On Friday, he pushed his luck. He cooked a huge dinner of roasted chicken and potatoes, enough for a small army. He brought it over as she was finishing her work. "My eyes were bigger than my stomach," he announced. "Are you hungry?" Hannah just stared at the feast. "I should be getting home," she managed. He replied, "It will all go to waste, and I hate to eat by myself." They both knew what he was doing, but after a moment she sat. At first they were silent, but a good meal has a way of making people talk, and she slowly began to tell him her story. She described her father, a strict pastor, and her obedient mother. "I thought love was supposed to be complete surrender," Hannah confessed quietly. "Then I met Caleb Ross at 17. My father gave his blessing, and we were married." The empty way she said his name told Ethan everything. He gently asked about her children. Her voice turned warm as she named them. Sarah, who was 7, Tommy, 6, Sam, 4, and baby Lily, just 1. "They deserve better than I can give them," she said, her tone becoming bitter. "My 4-year-old asked if we could have meat for dinner, just once." A cold anger rose in Ethan. "Where is their father?" Her laugh was harsh. "Caleb does not stay put, and he surely does not pay child support." "You could take him to court," Ethan said. She just looked at him. "With what money?" "Some fights just are not worth the trouble," she said, her eyes meeting his. "Sometimes you just have to survive." That tired, broken sound in her voice hit Ethan hard. Before he could say a word, Hannah was up, clearing her plate. "I should get back. The kids will be wondering." He insisted she take the leftovers, packing up the chicken and potatoes. Her hands trembled as she took the containers, her thank you thick with emotion she could not hide. The minute she left, Ethan picked up his phone. "Jim, it is Ethan Mercer. I need you to look into a child support case for me. Real quiet." His lawyer asked what kind. A woman named Hannah Cole. Her ex is Caleb Ross. I need to know if there is anything we can do. Jim sighed. Ethan, if this fella is the deadbeat you think he is, the system is not built to help her. Ethan's voice was firm. Then we will have to be. That weekend, Ethan drove out to the Peterson cabin. He was not spying, he was sizing things up. He parked down the road and came up through the woods. In the daylight, the place looked even worse. The roof was one good storm away from caving in, and the whole cabin leaned like it was tired of standing. Then he saw Sarah sitting on the porch with a book, reading to her little brother and sister. Baby Lily was asleep in a wooden crate, tucked into what looked like his own fleece blanket. Sarah could not have been more than 7, but she sounded out the words for the little ones with the patience of a teacher. Ethan watched this small family, tough as nails, and his mind was made up. They deserved a better hand than they had been dealt. He just had to figure out how to help without wounding Hannah's pride. Monday morning, he had his plan. Hannah, he started, finding her scrubbing a bathroom, I need to talk with you. She looked up, instantly on guard. It is about the guest wing. I am fixing to start hosting clients here for business dinners. He tried to sound casual. I will need someone to help with cooking and serving. Make sure things run smooth. It would be evening work, and I would pay you $30 an hour. Her eyes narrowed. That is a lot of money just to serve dinner. It is for coordinating the whole thing, he said. Planning, cooking, all of it. The lie about having dinners planned felt too easy. What about my kids? She asked, her voice sharp. I cannot just leave them. Well, what if you brought them here? Hannah froze solid. I am not bringing my children to your house, Mr. Mercer. It is Ethan, he said gently. And why not? I have 6 empty bedrooms. They could do homework or play outside while you work. He made it sound like the most sensible thing in the world. It is not right, she said, struggling for a reason. This is a workplace. Hannah, he said, his voice soft. I know where you live. All the color washed out of her face. You followed me. I was worried, he admitted. You are raising 4 kids in a place that ought to be torn down. This is not charity, it is just common sense. You had no right, she whispered, her hands clenched into fists. You are right, I did not. And I am sorry for that. But now that I know, I cannot just look the other way while you work yourself to the bone. This is not pity. It is a job offer, plain and simple. Why do you care? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan thought for a moment. My father was a mean man. My mother was scared of him, and scared of everything else. I left home at 17, because it was the only way to survive. I know what it feels like when the world is just waiting for you to fail. He paused, meeting her tear-filled eyes. But I also know how one person, just one, believing in you can change everything. It is the difference between just getting by and actually living. The air between them was thick with hope and fear. One dinner, Hannah said at last, a trial run. If it is no good, we never speak of this again. Deal. They shook on it, and for Ethan, it felt like he had just won the biggest deal of his life. The next Saturday, Ethan heard an old car rumbling up his driveway. It was Hannah's sedan held together with rust and a prayer, with 4 car seats squeezed in the back. The kids spilled out, their eyes wide as saucers, looking at the ranch. Sarah, ever the little mother, held Lily on her hip while the boys stayed close to Hannah. Kids, this is Mr. Mercer, Hannah said. Just Ethan is fine, he said, and offered his hand to Sarah. He treated her like a grown-up, and she carefully shook it. I am Sarah. This is Lily, Tommy, and Sam. It is real nice to meet all of you, Ethan said with a warm smile. Your mom has some work to do in the kitchen. How about all of you go explore? The kids looked to their mom, who gave a slow nod. Stay together, she warned. As the boys took off for the barn, Hannah stood twisting her hands. I am sorry. They can be a handful. They are kids, Ethan said. Let them run. Come on, I will show you the kitchen. Inside, she just stared. She ran her hand over the marble countertop like it was treasure. This is something else, she breathed. It is built to be used, he said. My mother loved to cook. Now you are the boss in here. Tell me what to do. For the next 3 hours, Ethan watched her come alive. She moved around the kitchen with a confidence he had not seen before, preparing a beautiful meal of lamb and roasted vegetables. The whole house filled with the smell of fresh bread and new beginnings. Every now and again, one of the kids would pop in, full of wonder from their adventures around the big ranch house. The children were a constant hum of activity. Tommy wanted to play basketball while Sam was fascinated by the old piano. Hannah handled every interruption with grace, but Ethan could see the strain on her face. He called to the oldest girl, "Sarah, how about you be in charge of your brothers for a while? There are movies in the den." The girl's face lit up with a sense of purpose. "Yes, sir, I can do that." Once the children were settled, a calm quiet returned to the kitchen. As Hannah cooked, she hummed that same little song from before. After some time, she turned to him. "Can I ask you something? Is this business dinner even real?" Ethan decided she deserved the truth. "Yes and no. My friends Jim and his wife are coming. I invited them," he admitted, "so you could have a practice run before I start having you cook for real clients." Hannah's hands stopped moving. "So this is just an excuse to feed my kids." He shook his head. "This is a job you have earned. If your children benefit, that is just a happy accident." She looked him square in the eye. "You are not as clever as you think." He stepped a little closer. "Maybe not, but I am right. You are good at this, and those kids deserve more than beans." A storm of emotions crossed her face. Finally, she said, "I cannot decide if I should thank you or slap you." A faint smile appeared. "Deal." The dinner was a perfect success, and in the kitchen her children ate like royalty. He watched them eat everything in sight, the kids so hungry it hurt to see. Later, after they were gone and the house was quiet again, Anna found him on the porch. "Sam asked if we could live here," she said softly. "He thinks it is the most beautiful place on earth." Ethan wanted to tell her they could, that this could be their home for good. But he held his tongue. It had to be her choice. "Y'all are welcome any time," he said instead. As she drove off with her sleeping children, she whispered, "I know." The next week, Hannah started bringing the kids over every afternoon. She never asked, she just appeared, and the big empty house suddenly felt like a home. It filled up with their homework and their quiet games. Ethan started keeping the pantry stocked with juice boxes and crackers, a silent offer she began to accept with a weary grace. Then, 2 weeks into this new routine, he came home and found her in his kitchen, broken and sobbing, like her heart was finally giving out. She held out her phone. The text message was from a number she had not saved, and it was signed with a name that made Ethan's blood run cold. Caleb. The message was short and brutal. "Found you. I am coming for what is mine." Ethan's voice was hard. "You call the law." She let out a hollow laugh. "And say what? That my husband, because we are not divorced, sent me a text? They will not do a thing until he is standing on the porch with a fist raised." "Then you and the kids stay here," Ethan said. It was not a question. Hannah stared at him. "I cannot just move my family into your house." "Why not?" he asked simply. "I would rather have y'all here, behind a locked door, than out there alone. If he shows up, I want you somewhere safe." The fight drained right out of her, leaving only fear. "Just for tonight," she agreed in a whisper. "For as many nights as you need," he answered. As they gathered the sleeping children, Sarah woke instantly, the way kids do when they have learned to sleep with one eye open. Her gaze was sharp. "Is Daddy coming?" she asked quietly. The silence in the room was answer enough. Hannah's voice cracked. "We are safe here. Ethan is going to make sure we are safe." Ethan looked at the little girl and gave her a single, firm nod. A promise was made without a single word. He settled them into the guest rooms. "Thank you," Hannah said, catching his arm. "In my experience," she said, her voice full of sadness, "decency has not been all that basic." Ethan did not sleep. He sat in his office and called in favors. The first call was to Jim, his lawyer. "I need everything you have on Caleb Ross. He found Hannah." Jim was all business. "You will have it by morning." The second call went to his ranch foreman, Miguel. "I need eyes out for a stranger asking about Hannah. Do not talk to him, just call me." Miguel's voice was steady. "Consider it done, boss. We will keep watch." His final call was to his sister, Rebecca, a family lawyer out in California. He explained the situation as quickly as he could. Her legal mind cut right through it. "No divorce papers, no custody agreement, and no official record of abuse?" she asked. He confirmed it was all true. "Then listen to me, Ethan," she said, her voice sharp with warning. "Legally, that man has every right to see his kids. She is in a world of trouble." "So you're telling me he has a legal right to just show up and take those children?" Ethan's voice was tight with disbelief. "I'm afraid so," his sister Rebecca said. "That's family law. But we can fight him. She needs to file for divorce and sole custody right now. And you need to document every single phone call and threat." Ethan told her Hannah and the kids were at his place. "Lord, little brother, you are in deep," she sighed. "A man like that, he doesn't like losing control. He'll see you as taking what belongs to him." "Let him try," Ethan said, his voice hard as iron. Rebecca promised to find a lawyer who would work for free. "Just be smart about this," she warned. Later that night, he found Hannah standing in the dark kitchen, staring out at the ranch. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly. She flinched. "I keep feeling like he's out there," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Just watching us." Ethan came and stood beside her. "He is not," he said with certainty. "And even if he was, he would have to go through me." "That is what I'm afraid of," she answered, turning to him. "You have no idea what he can do when he's angry." "Then tell me," Ethan urged. Hannah wrapped her arms around herself. "It started out small," she said, her voice flat and empty. "Controlling what I wore, who I saw. Then it got worse. The yelling, the holes he'd punch in the walls. He never hit me where anybody could see it. Always my stomach, my ribs." Ethan's jaw was clenched tight, but he stayed quiet. "I stayed because I was scared. Because he told me nobody else would ever want a woman with 4 kids. Then one afternoon he grabbed our Sarah, she's only 5. He grabbed her little arm so hard it bruised. In that second, I saw my daughter's future, and I knew I had to leave. So I packed up the kids that night while he was passed out and just drove," she finished. He watched as her shoulders began to shake with silent tears. Ethan moved closer. "He is not taking you back, and he is not taking those kids. We will fight this thing the right way." "Why?" she asked, her voice full of pain. "Why do you care so much?" "I know you are a good mother," he said gently. "And I know what it feels like to believe you are all alone in the world." She finally broke, pressing her face against his chest as he held her, letting out all the fear she had held inside for months. The next morning, a call came from his friend Jim. "Caleb Ross has 2 prior arrests for assault," Jim said. "And there's a bench warrant for him in Montana for failing to pay child support." "He has a warrant out for his arrest?" Ethan repeated. "It's not high priority, but it exists," Jim confirmed. "Listen to me, this guy is bad news. He is not after those kids because he loves them. This is all about control." Jim urged him to have Hannah file for divorce and emergency custody that very day, using Caleb's own criminal record against him. A storm was brewing, and it had nothing to do with the weather. Ethan looked at Hannah. "Honey, can we talk for a minute? Alone?" She nodded toward her daughter. Sarah, baby, you mind your brothers for a bit? Once in the office, Ethan laid it all out. The proof his friend Jim had found. The hard road ahead. Hannah stood there, wrapping her arms around herself, looking smaller than ever. "If I file for divorce," she whispered, "he'll know right where to find me." Ethan shook his head. "He already knows. That text message proved it. Hannah, you've been running scared. It is time to start fighting smart. With the law on your side, those kids have a real chance." Her voice was barely a breath. "What if the judge gives him custody?" "Then we fight harder," Ethan said, his voice firm. "But at least we're fighting instead of hiding." She finally gave a slow nod. "All right, let's do it." The next morning, Jim, the lawyer, came out to the ranch himself. He spread a stack of papers on the kitchen table. A divorce petition, a request for emergency custody, a protection order. Every time Hannah signed her name, it felt like she was declaring war. "Caleb will be served within 72 hours, Jim explained. "If he shows up before then, you call the sheriff and you call me. You are doing the right thing, Hannah." After he left, a heavy silence fell over the house. The kids felt it, getting quiet and clingy. Ethan saw Hannah's hands tremble when she thought no one was watching. He wanted to promise her the world, but he was not a man for empty words, so he just stayed close. 2 days later, his phone rang. It was an unknown number, but he answered it anyway. "Mercer," a rough voice growled. "This the fellow who's been with my wife?" Ethan kept his own voice calm and steady. "This is Ethan Mercer. Who is this?" "You know good and well who this is. Where is Hannah?" "If you are Caleb Ross," Ethan said, "then you ought to know she has filed for divorce. Any talking you need to do goes through her lawyer." Caleb just laughed, a nasty sound. "I do not give a damn about lawyers. I want my kids. That is not my decision to make." "The hell it is not. You are the one keeping them from me." Ethan felt his own temper start to simmer. "Your family. You are the one who left them with nothing." "You think your money makes you tough?" Caleb sneered. "I am coming to get what is mine." The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp. "They are not property, Caleb." When Caleb spoke again, his voice was a low snarl. "You have no idea who you are messing with, Mercer. When I am done, you will wish you had never laid eyes on Hannah Cole." Then the line went dead. Ethan found Hannah in the kitchen, showing Sarah how to knead bread dough. The peaceful, homey scene made the news he carried feel 100 times heavier. He told her what Caleb had said, leaving out the ugliest parts but keeping the danger clear. Her hands froze on the dough. "He is going to come here?" she said. It was not a question. "Probably," Ethan admitted, "but we will be ready." That evening, he took her out behind the barn and showed her how to use the shotgun. She was a natural, her hands steady once she got past the initial fear. After hitting 3 clay pigeons in a row, she lowered the gun. "I never thought I would be this kind of person," she said softly. Ethan looked at her, seeing the steel underneath the fear. "You are the kind of person who does whatever it takes to protect her kids." 3 days later, Caleb showed up. Ethan was clear across the ranch when his foreman Miguel called, his voice tight. "Boss, we have got a problem. A fella at the main gate says he is Hannah's husband. He is drunk and carrying a tire iron. Keep him there. Call the sheriff. I am on my way." Ethan's truck tore down the dirt road, kicking up a storm of dust. He called Hannah as he drove. "Lock every door, take the kids to the master bedroom, and do not come out." He could hear her voice, calm for the children's sake, as she hurried them along. Caleb Ross was exactly what he had pictured, wiry and mean with bloodshot eyes, pacing like a caged coyote. Miguel and 2 other ranch hands stood between him and the gate, looking casual but ready. "Mercer," Caleb hollered when Ethan pulled up. "I am him," Ethan said. "Then open this gate and let me see my family." "I cannot do that, Caleb." "The hell you cannot!" Caleb slammed the tire iron against the gate. The clang echoed across the pasture. "Those are my kids. My wife. You got no right." Hannah has filed for divorce, Ethan said, his voice deadly calm. You have been served. You need to leave. Caleb's face was beet red. You think you are some kind of hero? You do not even know her. Hannah is a liar and a thief. She stole my kids, and now she has got you wrapped around her little finger. The insult burned through Ethan, but he held his ground. Miguel tensed, ready to step in. I know she is a good mother you abandoned, Ethan said. The sheriff is on his way. You really want to add trespass into your list of problems? I will be back for what is mine. Caleb's eyes narrowed with hate. She told you I hit her, did not she? She always plays the victim. The only failure I see here, Ethan said slowly, is you. With a roar of rage, Caleb rushed the gate. The metal groaned, but held. Just then, the wail of sirens cut through the tense air. Caleb heard them too. His face went pale. This is not over, Mercer, he screamed, scrambling back to his beat-up Ford. He tore out onto the county road just as the sheriff's car pulled up. Sheriff Morrison took Ethan's statement and promised to put out an alert for Caleb's truck. But they all knew the truth. A piece of paper was not much protection. You have got good security here, the sheriff said. Keep it locked. And Ethan, do not try to be a hero. Would not dream of it, Ethan lied. After the sheriff left, he walked back toward the house, toward Hannah, knowing deep in his gut that this was only the beginning. After Caleb showed up screaming threats at the front gate, everyone was on edge. The kids stayed close to Hannah, their eyes wide with fear. Lily, the baby, was fussy, sensing the tension in the house. The calm they had found was gone. He's not going to stop, Hannah whispered later, after Ethan had sent Caleb packing. He will burn this whole place down before he lets us be free. The words were brave, but Ethan worried he had just painted a giant target on his own back. But then Sarah, all of 5 years old, looked up at him and said, Thank you for protecting us, Mr. Ethan. He knew then he would do it all over again. The real war began 5 days later. It did not come with fists, but with paper. A courier delivered Caleb's official response to the divorce papers. He's filing for joint custody, Jim said, his face grim as he spread the documents on the dining table. He claims Hannah abandoned him and is an unfit mother. Hannah's face turned white. He is twisting everything all around. That is what these men do, Jim said. They rewrite history, and there is more. He is demanding the court force you to return to Montana for the hearing. The fear in Hannah's eyes was sharp. Can he make me go back? We can fight it, Jim said, but we have to be aggressive. Ethan put a steady hand on her arm. We will be, he promised. We are not backing down. Jim, their lawyer, laid it out plain and simple. Right now, in the eyes of the court, those kids were just ghosts passing through town. They had no school records here, no doctor visits, nothing to tie them to this place. Ethan knew what he had to do. Before the sun went down, he had Sarah, Tommy, and Sam signed up for the local school. He booked them all checkups with a pediatrician, anchoring them to this county. He even got Hannah started on getting a new driver's license with the ranch as her address. This is all happening too fast, Hannah said, her voice tight with worry. You're turning your whole life upside down for us. I'm just making sure the law sees what I see, Ethan told her. That you all belong here. From the back seat, Sarah's small voice cut through the tension. Mama, please, let him help. Hannah looked at her daughter, and a silent understanding passed between them. Sometimes you just had to take the hand that was offered. All right, Hannah whispered. Hannah. The hearing was just 3 weeks away. Jim worked day and night, digging up everything he could on Caleb. He found old neighbors who remembered the shouting matches and saw the bruises Hannah tried so hard to cover up. He tracked Caleb's long history of losing jobs because of his drinking and his temper. Meanwhile, Caleb hired some slick lawyer from the city who started painting a whole different picture. He told a story of an unstable woman who ran off with his children to live with a rich rancher. "They're trying to make me look like I'm just after your money," Hannah said, her hands shaking as she read the legal papers. "That's the oldest trick in the book," Ethan said, taking the papers from her. "They're throwing dirt, hoping some of it sticks." "But sometimes it does," she whispered. "The truth doesn't always matter. It's the story people want to believe that wins." "Then we'll tell a better story," Ethan said, his voice firm. "And ours will be the truth." "You keep saying we," Hannah said, looking straight into his eyes. "Like this is your fight, too." "It is," Ethan answered, his voice low and steady. "It has been from the moment I decided I wasn't going to let anything bad happen to you or those kids." In the quiet of the room, Hannah did something that surprised them both. She leaned in and kissed him, a soft, questioning touch. When she pulled away, her face was flushed. "I am sorry," she started. "I should not have." "Don't you dare apologize," Ethan said, his voice a little rough. "But I need you to know, Hannah, that is not why I am doing any of this. I am not keeping score." "I know," she said with a small smile. "That is why I wanted to." She gathered up some scattered papers and quickly left the room, leaving Ethan feeling like the very ground beneath his feet had shifted. In the days leading up to the hearing, life on the ranch found a new rhythm. The kids started to blossom. Tommy came home from school, beaming with pride over a gold star. Sam finally made a friend. Sarah was always lost in a stack of library books. Even little Lily was babbling more and took her first shaky steps right there in Ethan's living room. Ethan found himself tangled up in their lives in the best possible way. He stumbled through third-grade math homework and learned how to braid Sarah's hair. He got used to Sam, quiet as a mouse, creeping into his room after a nightmare to sleep on a pile of blankets on the floor. "You are good with them," Hannah said one morning, watching him flip pancakes while settling a squabble between the boys. "I am just winging it," he chuckled. "No," she said softly. "They trust you, and they do not give that away for free." "Their father never saw them as a gift," Hannah said quietly, her voice distant. "He called them burdens, proof that I had failed." The casual cruelty of it made Ethan's blood run cold. 2 days before the hearing, Caleb showed up again. This time he was smarter. He went straight to the elementary school right before the bell rang. He stood on the sidewalk with a big sign that read, "A Father's Rights Matter," and handed out flyers with old pictures of the kids. The school called Hannah, who called Ethan. They arrived to find Caleb putting on a show for all the other parents. "There they are now," Caleb shouted when they pulled up. "The woman who stole my children, and the rich man who helped her." Parents stared and whispered. Hannah walked toward the school, her face pale but determined, with Ethan right beside her. "Hannah, baby, do not do this," Caleb called out, his voice dripping with fake concern. "The kids need their daddy. I have changed. I have been sober for 6 months. All I want is a chance." Just then, Sarah's voice, clear and strong, cut through the noise. "You are a liar." Everyone turned. Sarah stood at the school's entrance, her little brothers right behind her like a protective wall. "You have not changed," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "You are the same mean person you have always been. You hurt Mama, and you hurt us. We are never going back with you." The crowd's mood shifted in an instant. Caleb's friendly mask dropped, and pure rage flashed in his eyes. "You little brat," he snarled. "You do not talk to your father that way." "You are not my father," Sarah shot back. "Fathers protect their kids." Ethan stepped between them. "You need to leave, now." Just then, the sheriff's car pulled up. He took one look at the scene and walked straight to Caleb. "Mr. Ross, I'm going to have to ask you to move along. You are causing a disturbance." "I am not your sweetheart." "You are the same mean drunk you have always been," Sarah said, her 7-year-old voice shaking but strong. "You hurt Mama and you hurt us, and we are never, ever coming back to you." The crowd's whispers shifted as they looked at Caleb with suspicion. His face twisted in rage. "You little brat! You do not talk to your father like that." "You are not my father. A father is supposed to protect his kids," she answered. Ethan stepped right between them. "You need to leave, now. She has every right to pick up her children from school without being bothered. The restraining order hearing is in 2 days. Until then, you stay away," Ethan warned. Caleb just sneered. "The law is on my side, Mercer. Those are my kids." Just then, Sheriff Morrison pulled up. "Mr. Ross, I'm going to have to ask you to move along. You're causing a disturbance." Caleb knew he had to leave, but he got the last word in. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Hannah. Come Thursday, a judge is going to see right through your lies, and those kids are coming home with me." He left, but the damage was done. He had planted seeds of doubt all through the community. That night, Sarah could not sleep. Ethan found her sitting on the porch steps, staring into the dark. "Hey, kiddo. Are you okay?" She just shrugged her small shoulders. "Is he really going to take us away?" Ethan sat down beside her. "He is going to try his best. But we are going to do everything we can to stop him." "What if you cannot? What if the judge makes us go back?" "Then we keep fighting," he promised. "We do not ever give up." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I meant what I said today. He is not my real dad. A real dad would not scare his kids." Then she looked up at him and asked, "Are you going to be our dad?" The question hit Ethan like a punch. "Well, that is complicated, Sarah." "Why? You live with us. You take care of us. You make Mama smile," she said with a wisdom far beyond her years. "Seems pretty simple to me." "It is more than just that, kiddo. It is about what your mom wants and what you kids need." "I choose you," Sarah said quietly. "I do not know about Mama or the boys, but I choose you." Ethan pulled her into a tight hug. The day of the hearing was cold and gray. Their lawyer, Jim, met them on the courthouse steps. "Remember what we practiced? Just tell the truth. The judge will see who is lying." The courtroom was formal, and Judge Catherine Martinez looked like a woman who did not put up with nonsense. Caleb sat at the other table, cleaned up and playing the part of a concerned father. It was sickening to watch. Hannah testified first. Her voice was steady as she listed the facts of their marriage and his abuse. But her hands shook when she talked about the night Caleb had grabbed Sarah. Caleb's lawyer went right for the throat on cross-examination. "Mrs. Ross, you claim my client was abusive, but you never once filed a police report. Why is that?" "I was scared," she answered. "Or maybe you're making it up. You took your children to live in a condemned cabin with no running water. Does that sound like a choice a concerned mother would make?" "I did the best I could with what I had," Hannah said, her jaw tight. "And now you are living with Mr. Mercer, a man you barely knew. How did that arrangement come about?" Jim stood up. "Objection." The lawyer rephrased his question. "Mrs. Ross, please answer with a simple yes or no. Are you in a romantic relationship with Ethan Mercer?" Hannah looked across the room at Ethan. In that moment, he saw her make a choice. She could lie and risk her credibility, or she could tell the truth and give Caleb ammunition. She chose the truth. "Yes," she said clearly. A murmur went through the courtroom. Caleb's lawyer smiled like he had just won. "So you left your husband, took his children, and immediately started a relationship with another man. And you expect this court to believe your motive was protecting your children and not just pursuing your own interests?" "I left because Caleb was hurting us," Hannah insisted. "Or did you just see a rich rancher and use your children as leverage to get the life you wanted?" "That is not what happened." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed strong and clear. "He offered us safety when we had none. He gave my children food when they were hungry. He treated us with kindness when all we had ever known was cruelty. I did not seduce him or manipulate him. I accepted help from a good man who cared if we lived or died." The raw honesty of her words seemed to catch the lawyer off guard. Then it was Ethan's turn to testify. He explained the work arrangement and the terrible condition he had found the family living in. He described Caleb's threatening behavior at the school. Mr. Mercer, Caleb's lawyer asked, you are a wealthy man. Why did you decide to help Mrs. Ross specifically? Because she needed help, and I was in a position to give it. But is it not true you were attracted to her? Ethan glanced at the judge, then decided on the truth. Eventually, yes. But that is not why I helped her. Are you certain? The lawyer pushed. Because it looks like you saw a vulnerable woman with 4 children and decided she would make a nice, ready-made family for a lonely millionaire. That is offensive, and it is wrong, Ethan said. Is it? You have already inserted yourself into these children's lives. You have encouraged them to see you as a real dad. Do you see nothing wrong with that? I see a woman who is being abused and children who are suffering, Ethan replied, his voice firm. I see a man who abandoned them and now wants them back only to control them. And I see my part in this as making sure Hannah and those kids are safe. How noble. Tell me, if the court awards custody to my client, will you accept that decision? The question was a clear trap. I will accept whatever the court decides is in the best interest of those children, Ethan answered. But I will also do everything in my power to make sure the court has all the facts before making that choice. The proceeding went on, with Miguel and Martha both testifying to Caleb's threatening behavior and Hannah's character. In the courtroom, Caleb played his part perfectly. I have made mistakes, he said, his voice dripping with fake emotion. But I have been sober 6 months. I just want a chance to be the father my kids deserve. But Jim, Ethan's lawyer, was prepared. Mr. Ross, he began, were you not intoxicated and threatening violence at Mr. Mercer's ranch just 3 weeks ago? Caleb faltered. I was emotional. Jim continued. Their mother left to protect them from you. Is it also true there is a warrant for your arrest in Montana for not paying child support? Caleb called it a misunderstanding. Jim held up a document. These records show you owe $17,000. You have not made one payment in over a year. Does that sound like a father who cares model? $17 a week, Jim's voice cut sharp through the courtroom. That was the minimum the court ordered. You couldn't pay it, or did you choose not to because you were angry that Hannah left? Caleb sputtered, but the damage was done. When the judge called a recess, Hannah was shaking in the hallway. I ruined it, she whispered to Ethan. Admitting we're together just gave him what he needed to take my kids. Before Ethan could comfort her, Caleb appeared, all fake concern. Hannah, can we talk? Ethan stepped between them. Everything that concerns her concerns me, he said, his voice low. Caleb's smile turned ugly. You think you know her after 2 months? You don't know what she's like when she's being terrorized, made to feel worthless. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Yeah, I do. She's strong, brave, and a better parent than you'll ever be. Caleb's mask finally cracked. Just as he was about to explode, Jim appeared with a bailiff. Mr. Ross, he said calmly, if you want any chance in there, you'll walk away right now. Caleb shot Ethan a look filled with hate before stalking off. The final arguments were brutal. One lawyer painted Hannah as a woman using her kids to land a rich man. Jim painted Caleb as an abuser trying to dodge his responsibilities. Then it was all over, but the waiting. For 2 long days, Hannah was a wreck, pacing the floors at night, watching her children sleep as if to memorize their faces. The call came on a Thursday. Judge Martinez had made her decision. They needed to be at the courthouse in an hour. Back in that same courtroom, Ethan held Hannah's hand tight. Judge Martinez looked at Caleb. Mr. Ross, you claim to want what's best for your children, but you failed to support them. You have a documented history of violence and made no effort to see them for over a year. He froze. Then the judge looked directly at Hannah. Ma'am, you have consistently put your children's welfare first, providing them with a stable and loving home. Her voice was firm. I am granting you sole, legal, and physical custody. The words hung in the air for a second before they sank in. Hannah let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh, collapsing against Ethan in relief. Caleb erupted. You can't do this. Those are my kids, he roared. She's sleeping with some rich guy and bought you all off. Judge Martinez's voice was like ice. "You will control yourself, Mr. Ross, or I will hold you in contempt. Continue, and I will revoke visitation entirely and issue a permanent restraining order." His lawyer finally managed to drag him out of the courtroom. The judge then granted Hannah a protection order, ordering Caleb to stay 500 feet away from her and the children. Outside, as the reality of her freedom washed over her, Hannah finally broke down and cried in Ethan's arms. "It's really over," she kept saying. But her lawyer warned them, "He can still appeal, and he probably will." Ethan held her tighter. "Let him. We'll beat him again." Driving home as the sun went down, Hannah felt like she could breathe for the first time in years. But that peace shattered when they saw a pillar of black smoke rising from the direction of the ranch. Ethan slammed his foot on the gas. As they got closer, a horrifying sight met their eyes. The old cabin, Hannah's first safe haven, was burning to the ground, and spray-painted in jagged red letters across the main barn was a single terrifying message: "This is not over." The fire department was already there, but it was too late. The small cabin was being eaten by flames, taking with it the last few things Hannah owned in the world. "He did this," Hannah whispered, her voice hollow. "He burned it all down." Miguel, the ranch foreman, ran up to the truck. "Boss, everyone's safe. But whoever did this, they were smart. They cut the power to the security cameras, came in through the back road, and were gone before anyone even saw the flames." Ethan looked at Hannah's face, watching it crumble as she stared at the fire. He told Miguel to take her and the kids inside and lock the doors. The fire chief, a man Ethan had known for 20 years, met him halfway to the blaze. "This was arson, Ethan," he said, his face grim. "They poured accelerant all around it. I cannot prove it was Caleb Ross yet, but I would bet my pension on it." The chief put a hand on his shoulder. "Men like that do not walk away from losing. You watch your back. Watch over Hannah and those kids. This kind of rage does not just burn itself out." Sheriff Morrison arrived a short while later. After looking at the tire tracks, the burn patterns, and the message on the barn, he put out a warrant for Caleb's arrest. "We've got every department in 3 states looking for his truck," he promised. "In the meantime, I am stationing a deputy here around the clock." It should have felt reassuring, but instead it felt like they were living in a fortress under siege. Inside the house, the children were huddled with Hannah, not crying, just quiet, with a type of shock that understood the monster they had escaped was still out there, hunting for them. The shock was too big for tears. "Our house is gone?" little Sam whispered. Hannah smoothed his hair, her own heart aching. "Yeah, darling, it's gone." Sarah, wise beyond her years, looked straight at Ethan. "It was him, wasn't it? Our daddy." Ethan knelt down, meeting her gaze. "We reckon so, but the law is on his trail. He won't get away with this." "He always does," Sarah said, her voice flat. But later that night, staring into the dark, Hannah told Ethan, "He's not going to stop. A piece of paper from a judge means nothing to him." Ethan poured 2 coffees that neither of them touched. "So what do we do?" Hannah gave a broken laugh. "I'm just so tired of being scared, Ethan." "Then we don't run," he said, his voice solid as an old oak. "We stay right here and fight." She looked at him, a mix of fragile and fierce. "Why are you doing all this? Nobody would blame you if you walked away." "I'd blame me," he said, taking a breath. "Because somewhere along the way I fell in love with you, Hannah, with all of y'all, and I don't walk away from people I love." Tears streamed down her face as she closed the space between them. "I love you too," she whispered. While they held each other, Caleb's truck was found 3 days later at a Wyoming rest stop. Deputy Morrison called. "He's on foot now and he's cornered. A cornered man is a dangerous man." So Ethan turned his ranch into a fortress. More cameras, more patrols, and a shotgun that Hannah now knew how to use. The kids felt the tension, their games grew quiet, and they started checking the locks. Sarah became a little watchdog for her siblings, and it broke Ethan's heart to see them living under a cloud of fear. A couple of weeks went by, and things almost felt normal. The kids went to school, Hannah helped Ethan with the ranch books, and for brief moments, they could almost pretend they were just a regular family. But they were all just waiting for the other shoe to drop. The attack came on a Tuesday. Ethan woke to the sound of shattering glass and the alarm screaming through the house. He grabbed his pistol. Hannah met him in the hall, shotgun ready. "The kids," she said. Little Sarah peeked out, walkie-talkie in hand. "He's in the kitchen." Ethan found Caleb, drunk and bleeding, climbing through the busted window. "Get out of my house," Ethan said, his voice deadly calm. Caleb stumbled to his feet, pulling a hunting knife. "You took my family." "You did that yourself," Ethan countered. "She was never your property." Caleb lunged, but Ethan was faster. A single, well-placed shot sent the knife clattering to the floor. "The Bible says," Caleb snarled, but his words were slurred, "you don't know nothing about family. You're just some rich fella playing house." He lunged with a knife. Years of ranch work made Ethan quick, but the blade still sliced his arm. He ignored the sting and grabbed Caleb's wrist. They crashed against the kitchen table, a desperate struggle for control. Caleb, fueled by pure rage, fought like a cornered animal. "They're mine," he panted. "I'll kill you and take 'em back." Then a shotgun blast echoed through the house. Hannah stood in the doorway, her face pale but her hands steady on the weapon. The shot was a warning. "Get away from him," she said, her voice shaking just a little, "or the next one won't miss." Caleb stared at her, his anger crumbling. "Hannah, baby, I just wanted to talk." "Talk about what?" Her voice was hard as stone. "How you'd rather kill us than let us go." "I understand perfectly now, Caleb. You're never going to change." "I can," he pleaded. "Just one more chance." "I gave you 100 chances," she shot back. "Every time you laid a hand on me, I told myself it was the last. I'm done giving you chances. Done being afraid." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Help was on the way. A desperate, ugly look twisted Caleb's face. "Without you, I'm nothing. That's not my problem anymore." As red and blue lights flashed through the windows, he made a final, terrible choice. He lunged, not for Ethan, but toward the hallway where the children were hiding. Hannah fired again. This time, she did not miss. The blast hit his leg, and he went down, screaming. Ethan kicked the knife away and pinned him to the floor just as deputies burst through the door. They cuffed Caleb right there on the kitchen floor. The sheriff, Morrison, looked at the mess and laid it out plain for Ethan. "That's breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, and violating a restraining order. He's looking at serious prison time." Hannah sat at the table, the adrenaline finally leaving her. The kids huddled around her, safe. "Is it over?" she asked softly. "Yeah," Morrison said, watching them load a screaming Caleb into an ambulance. "This time, it's over." The trial was quicker than anyone expected. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury wasn't fooled by his excuses. They deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty. On everything. The judge gave him 15 years with no chance of parole for at least 10. His parental rights were gone for good. When the verdict was read, Hannah cried tears of pure relief. That winter, for the first time in years, she let herself think about Christmas. Ethan, bless his heart, went all out with a giant tree and more presents than the kids knew what to do with. On Christmas morning, after the storm of wrapping paper, Ethan handed her a small, simple box. "Now, before you get any ideas," he said quietly, "it's not what you think." Inside was an old, worn brass key. "It's the key to this house," Ethan explained. "It's your house now if you want it. You and the kids belong here for as long as you want to stay." Hannah looked from the key to the man who had become her rock. "What if I want to stay forever?" she whispered. "Then I guess I'd better get used to a full house," he smiled. She cupped his face. "What if I want a real partnership?" His grin was slow and sure. "Then I suppose I ought to make an honest woman of you." From across the room, Sarah looked up from her new books. Are you all going to get married? Would that be all right with you? Hannah asked. Sarah pretended to think hard. I suppose, long as Ethan keeps making pancakes on Saturdays. And you make Mama smile, Sarah finished, her own smile bright and real. That's the most important part. They got married that spring. A small ceremony right there in the living room. The kids were the witnesses. Life on the ranch found a new, happy rhythm. Hannah, it turned out, had a sharp mind for business, and soon had the ranch turning a better profit than ever. The kids started to heal. Ethan legally adopted all four of them, giving them his last name, Mercer. They shed their old name like a skin that no longer fit. One afternoon, on the anniversary of the fire, they stood on the cleared land where the old cabin used to be. Hannah had refused to let him rebuild there. Instead, she had planted a field of wildflowers. Do you ever regret it? Ethan asked softly. Fighting so hard for this life? Hannah looked back at the main house where she could hear their children laughing. Not for 1 second, she said. In the end, there was no dramatic trial. Caleb took a plea deal, trading a confession for a long sentence. With him locked away, the fear finally lifted from the ranch. Life settled into a new kind of normal, one filled with the noisy chaos of a family. One evening, Hannah looked out at the sunset painting the Texas sky. This is what I was always fighting for, she said, taking his hand. I just didn't know it was you. Ethan smiled. We found each other, he said, and we chose each other. That's the real story. They built a family not on blood, but on showing up and staying put. Ethan learned his greatest wealth wasn't the land he owned, but the family he'd earned. They didn't live happily ever after because life's messier than that. Instead, they lived fully and fiercely, a family forged in fire, choosing each other every single day. And in the heart of Texas, that was more than enough. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.